Greetings, WoW Talkers, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about why I believe classic raiding is more difficult than retail raiding. Keep in mind, this video's purpose isn't to show which is superior to the other. Many of you out there probably think retail is harder, and that is fine. I'm just here to show why I think classic raiding is harder. So without further ado, let's get to it. When people talk about difficulty regarding classic versus retail raiding, they tend to forget that difficulty comes in different shapes and forms. People usually go only for the tactics aspect, and once they see that retail tactics are more complex, they instantly say that retail is harder. But let us look at the bigger picture and dig deeper into what made classic raiding harder for me. First of all, let's talk about what you needed to prepare for raiding in classic WoW. Now, the most important thing that you needed in order to gear up in classic WoW was gear. Gearing up in classic WoW was extremely non-linear. It was really uncommon to come across gear, let alone gear that has stats you needed for your spec. Quests were non-linear, which meant it took time for you to explore and try to find new quests which gave you decent gear. Many of those quests which rewarded some good gear were dungeon quests. Not only that, but professions played a huge role in gearing up, so most of the time you either had to craft your own gear or ask someone to craft something for you. Now some people may say, why not just do dungeon quests? Well, they weren't enough. Also, it wasn't that simple. Dungeons were difficult, especially if you did not have good equipment from questing. They needed strategic pulls, CCs, patience, well-timed use of abilities, and most of all, a lot of your time. Now, if we assume that you were able to assemble your team, and you were lucky enough not to have any disconnections, no levers, and you pushed through the dungeon all the way till the end, do you think that is it? Psst, you wish. Chances are, you didn't get everything you needed from the dungeon, so back to recruiting and back to spending hours in a dungeon. And don't get me wrong, for me, this wasn't a bad thing. In fact, I loved how things were back then, but this only goes to show how time consuming and how difficult it was to get gear in dungeons in order to progress to another dungeon just so that you could be prepared to raid. Vanilla WoW had harsh requirements. Keep in mind, during Vanilla WoW, there was no cross realm, no dungeon finders. There wasn't even a tab where you'd list your group. You were limited to the players within your server, and things were less convenient and more time consuming. On the other hand, we have retail. In retail, gearing up to start raiding is quite simple and easy. You start off by questing in order to level up, then you are given quest A, which leads you to quest Z, and that's it. Throughout questing, you'll end up with a full set of what is called questing gear, and the stats will be fitted according to the spec that you have chosen. Keep in mind, leveling is quite easy and is no longer a memorable journey in WoW compared to Classic. I've made a video on how leveling was harder and more engaging in Classic WoW, so if you'd like to hear my thoughts on that, check out the link in the description. So by the time you're done questing, you have the right amount of gear for dungeons. Of course, nowadays, dungeons are a complete cakewalk in retail, with the exception of Mythic Plus dungeons, which are considered by many harder than heroic raids. On retail, you can sometimes just skip dungeons and jump straight into LFR and progress through the raid difficulties. It is that fast. Another thing that I would like to point out is professions and how important they were in Vanilla WoW. Currently in retail, if you wanted to get your flasks for raiding, you just hop on the auction house and buy the things you needed. You don't have to worry about your gold since it's quite easy to make. In Classic, that won't be the case. Gold was extremely valuable in Vanilla WoW. It was hard to make a lot of gold, and if you spent your gold on flasks, then you'll end up being broke real fast. Therefore, good luck trying to repair your armor. In order to raid, you needed to farm for materials to make your own flasks, or you needed to farm materials so that someone else could make them for you. The buffs which you received from those flasks would go away once you die, so you'll use up a lot of your flasks depending on how smooth your raid goes. A legendary WoW player named Kungen once said on stream that during Nax 40, there was around 20 people outside the raid, farming mats for those who were inside the raid, just so that they could restock on flasks when they needed it. This is how time consuming it was back then. The last point that I'm probably going to make is regarding convenience. During Vanilla WoW, a lot of things were inconvenient, unlike today's WoW. Back in Vanilla, there was no such thing as a dungeon journal, add-ons were limited, and raid alerts were scarce. In order for people to know the tactics of a boss, they had to test the boss's abilities and make their own tactics. Sure, there were websites that explained the tactics, but such websites could not have the tactics to begin with without the effort of the community coming together and helping each other when it came to the boss mechanics. Also, the information was not completely accurate, and it took time for such guides to become available or accurate through trial and error. While it is true that today we have perfect guides for vanilla raids, other factors which I've mentioned still remain. Even on retail, with all the guides and hand-holding that we have, people still can't get out of the fire in the boss fights. During vanilla, messing up in a boss encounter could result in an instant death, if not an entire wipe. You couldn't get away with messing up most of the time. Little things such as raid sizes made things more difficult to manage. Having a 40-man raid was not an easy thing to lead as a leader. When you wiped, it took time to come back since you needed all 40 people to run back to the raid and rebuff, except for that one lazy bum who causes the wipe and asks for a res. I've done it before. We all have. You were limited to one combat res. Healers had to make sure to use their abilities wisely, such as choosing which rank of a spell to use in order to save mana. Threat management was actually a thing. It was at times difficult to keep threat on yourself as a tank. You needed to really manage your threat levels. In some cases, you had to manage it very accurately for the off-tank to take aggro when needed. Nowadays, look at the countless add-ons and guides that are handed to you which help you in encounters. The Dungeon Journal literally tells you the spells the boss casts, the exact damage they make, and it even warns you of certain spells which tanks, DPS, or healers need to be aware of. Sure, mechanics-wise, retail is much more complex, but with all the conveniences, it makes it easier. Remove add-ons that help you, such as DBM, remove the Dungeon Journal, and remove or limit PTR testing. Then you'll see how much more difficult it actually becomes. So basically, the difficulty in Vanilla WoW did not simply come in the form of mechanics of bosses, but it came down to the strength of your character, the combat mechanics such as threat management and mana conservation, and other factors outside the boss tactics which made it difficult. I'm not saying Vanilla WoW raids had no complex encounters. It actually did start to become more complex after Molten Core, so it's not as simple as it sounds. The amount of time and dedication needed also added to the difficulty. You needed to be very dedicated and very committed in order to advance in raiding in World of Warcraft Vanilla. Once you take into consideration all that I've mentioned above and combine it together, you'll see why I believe that Vanilla WoW was actually harder for me. In fact, I believe that I might have missed many other points which I'm sure people will point out about Vanilla's difficulty. In the end, that is why I feel like classic raiding will be harder than retail raiding, but I understand that many out there believe that retail is harder, and that is fine. In life, sometimes we find things to be difficult, while others find that same thing to be easy. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked the video, give it a thumbs down. If you look forward to more content in the future, then do subscribe. If you don't look forward to more content, then don't subscribe. Have a good day, night, morning, wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Peace.